Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. It's midday here in a very hot day in Ontario. We have people joining us from the West Coast where it's early morning, and I'm sure it's much cooler, much more seasonable. And then we have people coming from the East where they're an hour ahead enjoying an afternoon cup of tea, iced tea, I suspect. Not quite as hot, I bet, as we've got in the other parts of the country. We're really pleased to have people come back and join us with City Talk. I think this is our 47th City Talk. Imagine Canadians wanting to talk as much as they want to with each other. How fantastic. And once again, we have Americans joining us on this session. It's really important for us to hear what's going on with our neighbors to the south and how they're experiencing COVID differently. I've got to say that the American challenge with COVID is in the newspaper all the time at the moment. And so we always acknowledge with these City Talks that we have these conversations, but they happen in parallel with all sorts of emergency relief and frontline workers that are still devoting themselves to keeping people safe and keeping them healthy and saving lives. And particularly we think about that when we watch how so many parts of the United States now are really full on dealing with this epidemic at a level of intensity that they didn't probably think they would have to deal with. So we always want to acknowledge that. We originate these recordings from Toronto, which is on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's now home to many First Nations, diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis, Toronto, across Turtle Island. And Toronto is also covered by Treaty 13 that was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties that were signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. I would say over this period of time, over these last several months, we've had to come to terms more and more with the inequities that exist in cities and the extent to which urbanist practices have reinforced exclusion and made much worse the kind of physical environment in which people have had to cope with COVID. And this has been raised with us again and again and again. People of color, people from marginalized communities, equity-seeking communities are feeling the experiences of COVID in a much different way than other communities and people of other racial orientation. And we want to try to have those conversations that are equitable, that we are all committing ourselves to whatever forms of renewed urbanism that we can be considering and planning so that cities are more just and more resilient and fairer places. And here we are at a state different across North America, at different stages of reopening, different stages, as I suggested, of coping with the epidemic. And we're really pleased to have with us 5 folks here who are engaged in a different kind of frontline service. In fact, I think restaurants have become more and more, people are more and more aware of how much they're part of our lifeline, part of our identity, part of how we build social capital and how we congregate together. I think there are a lot of people that would probably now realize that one of the reasons they live in cities is so that they can eat out. and all of a sudden, when you can't, or it's compromised, you know the old Joni Mitchell tune. I feel like we could play that every day, every City Talk we do, we could open with Joni Mitchell's "You Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone." And now your folks are all engaged in new ways of imagining this. And I'm sure there are some positive things. I, for one, am quite keen on the idea that we can now get takeout alcohol with our food. Just saying. But there are going to be presumably some things that will be positive for us that we'll be able to keep. But I know that your industries have been devastated by this, your workforce, the quality of life for people that actually are in these service jobs and the risks that they have to take. So we're really appreciative to have the folks that we have with us today who are going to talk to us about owning a restaurant, advocating for restaurant workers and hospitality workers. And also, what are the implications of how we're going to redesign streets and civic use and all that kind of thing. So really glad to have you. And I'm going to start, we always start with just a little bit of a roundtable here. So what I'd ask you to do is just, I'm going to call on you and you just tell us a little bit about who you are and where you live. And also what you've been seeing and what you think the challenges are. So just give us a couple minutes each, and then we'll have a kind of roundtable conversation. People that are attending live, please sign into the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. It's always interesting for us if you just put in where you're watching from. And then feel free to ask questions. You can answer each other's questions, put some stuff into the chat. I'll take it to the panel as appropriate. And also just a reminder, we videotape these sessions. We do a transcript and we publish the chat. So whatever folks put into that chat, it stays in that chat. People will read it. So, and people do. So we encourage you to participate. You can also come on social media, #CityTalk, and engage. These are just the beginnings of the conversations. We always feel it's the beginning of what we hope is an extended conversation. So, Matt, tell us everything. What have you been seeing? What are you dealing with? Tell us.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's absolutely amazing. Great opportunity to be able to speak about my industry a little bit, and to also hear from some other wonderful people and hear how the rest of the country is going about this. I am the owner of Berkeley North Restaurant in Hamilton, Ontario. We've been open for 4 years now. So just as we were getting into the groove of things, the whole world kind of changed pretty quickly. But Hamilton is a very interesting space with respect to the restaurant industry, that we are quite young in having a restaurant scene. We've always, I know growing up in Hamilton, traveled a lot to Toronto to check out their scene growing up. And now we have our own that we're very proud of. And I'm very lucky to be in an area where we call it Restaurant Rowe, which is downtown Hamilton, which has about 8 really good quality restaurants that have all been around for that last 3 or 4 years. And yeah, we've seen massive change. Our downtown core is a CBD, so we're normally filled with a lot of business people and a lot of suits and ties, we like to say, coming out for lunch for their meetings. And that is slowly coming back, but not really there. So it has made the restaurants have to make some pretty big changes in terms of hours of operation, what they are offering, and the entire package, really. My restaurant, we closed for 1 week during the mandatory 1 week shutdown. And we went from a restaurant that specialized in small plates, tapas style sharing, to reopening that week after, focus more on our lunch menu, which is a little bit more casual plates and takeout friendly food, which really pushed us out of our comfort zone from what we were known for and our clientele expected. But we were able to kind of quickly pivot to offer that, as well as some other interesting options in terms of market and produce, and we call it our essentials, to create additional revenue streams during this time. And then since we've been open or able to open up on our patio, we're one of the few in the city that are very blessed to have patio space. And exciting, which I'm excited to talk about too, our city shut down our major street, and with the help of our counselors, our local BIA in the city, we've shut it down, put out a whole bunch of cool and cute patio tables and little dining sets, and been able to service a large amount of people outside on our streets.
How many seats in your restaurant, Matt?
Normally 47.
Wow. And you had a week where people sat there and then they were gone.
Yeah. Well, we had luckily, like, we were a popular restaurant up into the lead up of this. But with my 47 seats, I only had a 12-seat patio. And with the restrictions that came out to try and put seats on my patio, I was looking at between 4 and 6 seats in my patio. So thankfully, with the assistance of the shutdown of the street, we've been able to get pretty close to that 40 seats back. So I am in a very, very small percentage that is blessed to be able to have an opportunity to get back some of that missing revenue.
Right. Okay, let's keep going to the people that are actually running places. Wendy, talk to us about you.
Oh, good morning, everyone. My name's Wendy Nicolay. I'm from Vancouver, BC. I'm a co-owner in the Cascade Restaurant Group and Main Street Brewing. So we've sort of seen this whole shutdown from two sides. As restaurants, we were pretty decimated. We were closed for 2 months. And then we're also a manufacturing and a wholesaler of beer. So we lost our business in terms of selling to the restaurant industry. So we lost that market, and we lost our tasting room. So it was a real challenge to turn everything around. Just in the first few weeks, we tried to pivot to takeout, which we'd never really done before. So that was really challenging and a costly thing, and hard to jump on when you've never been known for that. The beer business, though, however, thank God for the local people and the delivery services, because that saved us. If you don't have a listing in a government liquor store, the government liquor stores shut us all down too, all the local breweries. If you didn't have a listing, we didn't even have that revenue source. So it's been a lot of pushing with help from the Craft Beer Guild, everybody here has been just gunning for liquor delivery, getting our beer in stores. So for us, it was challenging on two fronts, being the wholesaler and then being the restaurants. As far as the restaurants go, fortunately out here in BC, we've had it relatively easy in terms of COVID. We got to reopen after the May long weekend to indoor dining to half capacity, and that was challenging. And then our BIA, big shout out to them in Mount Pleasant. Neil Wiles has been amazing at really pushing the city to get us our curbside patios. And without that, I just don't see how it would have been sustainable. Mm-hmm. So now we've got our curbside patios at a couple of our places. The city's really stepped up, even in a specific area where we have a rush hour lane, and we'll be getting curbside seating there. So everything's just moving really fast right now. Every day is different. We're getting news updates on what we can do, what we can't do. So it's just stepping up every chance we can and jumping on every opportunity that's given to us right now to keep it coming in. Because our restaurants are fairly small. We're 85, 95 seats. So when you look at distancing measures in your space, as they've taken away the half capacity, but when you've got a small space, you're really still running at half capacity or less when you're trying to keep people 2 meters apart. And we're finding most people are still going out in 2s, 4s. So you might have a nice big table of 6, but you've got a 2 in there. So you're still running at really low numbers. So I'm hopeful that the summer we're going to get some sun in Vancouver and we'll get to use our curbside patios, and we'll see this through.
Yeah, there is that. I want to come back and talk to you about how you guys are paying your staff, but let's go now. We'll stay on the West Coast and go to Vikram, who has a couple of restaurants as well in Vancouver. So we're glad they have a couple of Vancouver voices, because your BC's at a different stage of opening than other parts of Canada. So Matt isn't in the stage that you guys are at. And then when we go to the US, we'll hear from Patrick in terms of what's going on in New Brunswick. And then Alicia's going to give us even a broader perspective. But Vikram, talk to us about your experience with your restaurants, also in Vancouver.
First of all, namaste, everybody. COVID was not only difficult on financial terms and the fact that we lost a business. As a chef or as the owners of restaurants, you don't open restaurants so that they could be half full. You open restaurants because you want to be packed and bulging out of it. We love the gluttony of the fact that people are just waiting to come into your restaurants. I don't think anybody in life ever thinks that restaurant industry was going to be hit so badly. Any other industry, whether it's car or fashion industry, people say, well, there's recession, people are not buying expensive things. But people still have always a place to go out for dinner because that's what people socially do. And the fact that this social activity was shut down because of a pandemic put an emotional toll on all of us. So for me, having to sit down with my kitchen staff who are immigrant ladies who've come from India, to say to them after 25 years that you have to go on unemployment insurance or have to get some other help was an emotionally a very, very tough time personally for me as well. Financially, obviously, we're going to hopefully recover as people support you. We were able to do takeout because I serve a cuisine that is very good and easy to transport. So you put a curry in a box and the rice and naan, and it was totally manageable, and it worked really well for us in that sense, especially from the My Shanti restaurant. The locals really supported us there, and also at Vij's downtown. I did lose one of the restaurants to COVID because it didn't make sense for me to have two restaurants next to each other running half the capacity. So we amalgamated one restaurant into Vij's Rangoli and Vij's together and created a menu that is, a mixture of both places, a little bit of lunch and a little bit of dinner. The biggest challenge that I think we're going to find is getting the consumer confidence to say, we have done our due diligence, we are taking care of everybody, because there is so much information, whether the staff should wear masks, whether they should not wear masks. There is so much information, and it's almost like moving all the time. It literally is an interpretation of what the owner wants to do or what the chef wants to do with us. So where I think the government has done a fantastic job of keeping us abreast, keeping us safe, especially in British Columbia. And, the frontline workers have done extremely good job of taking care of the people, and they were ready for the preparedness for this. But it's a moving post. I don't think anybody knows, and I don't think anybody will be able to tell exactly what's going to happen until we find a solution, which is, a cure for this. But then again, this is going to mutate into something else, and then there's something else that's coming. My only thing I would say is, I think the takeout business, even though it was great from a financial point of view, I think the amount of wastage that we have put on this earth is absolutely astronomical. The amount of containers and plastics we've done. So yeah, we may have saved thousands and millions of lives today here, but we have hurt our planet so much and so badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sobering, a little unintended consequence. Okay, so those are the three vendors who are actually running restaurants, and then we've got two folks who can give us some sort of critical analysis about what they're seeing in the industry at large. So Alicia, let's go to you first, and then we'll go to Patrick. Talk to us about your perspective on this.
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Alicia Scholer. I'm with the Responsible Hospitality Institute based in Santa Cruz County, California. And so in response to COVID-19, we've put together kind of these sociable city vision innovation teams to find out what's going on in the ground and also to start reimagining nightlife, or what we like to call life at night. So as you know, nightlife has really been decimated by the pandemic. Cities that have been fortunate enough to have organized hospitality associations or nightlife associations or nighttime economy managers and night mayors on the ground have been absolutely critical in creating relief initiatives for the hospitality industry, as well as advocating to their states for specific initiatives to loosen alcohol regulations. Many of you, it seems like, have benefited from alcohol to go initiatives. Iowa was actually the first state to make this a permanent fixture of hospitality. And it's very interesting in the times. And as Matt and Wendy mentioned, with outdoor patios, that has really become the prevalent approach to expanding capacity during this time of reduced occupancy limits. So we've seen this approach ranging from kind of extensions of patios into the streets and sidewalks, being organized by BIAs, or business improvement districts, as we call them here. And there's also been a range of trends where initiatives have been created to kind of have more of a Bourbon Street model, and that has had its challenges with open carrying of beverages in a district. Unfortunately, certain types of venues have not been able to benefit from these types of initiatives, especially dance clubs or live music venues that don't have food service, so they can't take advantage of that alcohol to go or extensions into the public space. However, what we have seen, since nightlife is such a creative industry, we have seen some really incredible redesigns and really interesting ideas for bringing back sociability inside spaces. Unfortunately, in the US, there has definitely been a cautionary tale of nightlife being allowed to reopen and then being forced to close again. Prior to the 4th of July weekend, which we just had recently, 6 states actually closed thousands of bars and clubs on either a county-wide basis or a statewide basis. And I'd be happy to share what we believe were some of the issues that led to that, and what we can do in the future to prevent something like that from happening. But that start and stop approach has been extremely difficult for this industry to be able to survive.
Mm-hmm. I'll come back to you on that. And are you suggesting there is an organization called the Sociable City, or you produced a report called the Sociable City?
It's actually it's a network that we have created, a Sociable City network, and it's kind of a phrase that we're trying to use to broaden people's perspective of nightlife from a focus on alcohol consumption, thinking about their city's sociability options in terms of being sociable.
I like that, the Sociable City Network. And Patrick, I'm going to come to you next, but just before I do, I'll just remind people that CUI, this is Bring Back Main Street Week at CUI, and because we have a big project called Bring Back Main Street, and it's at bringbackmainstreet.ca, and it's all about the vibrancy of the street. And we started it because we were aware that everybody has an attachment to some place. It may not actually be a main street. It could be a mall. It could be a Four Corners. But one of the things that we're awakening to is that we rely on those streets for a sense of identity, but also safety. And that if you have lots of activity, you know, the old Jane Jacobs adage, eyes on the street are what secure a street to make it safe. And when you didn't have, in the early days of the pandemic, I would walk my street, which is a main corridor street in Toronto, which I would walk comfortably prior to COVID at any time. But I found increasingly that I was not comfortable walking in the evening because there weren't enough eyes on the street. So as you suggest, sociability, if sociability is taken from us, as Vic was just suggesting, we lose our sense of ourselves, don't we? So, okay, Patrick, let's go to you in St. John. And talk to us about your perspective as a consultant who's often providing advice and looking for solutions, and I know are working with us on Bring Back Main Street. Give us your experience.
Yeah, so I'm a food service consultant by long-term trade, and also have moved into the retail strategy with our strategy team at John Williams Group. And we do work across the country. And although I'm in St. John, I am still doing work across the country. We have taken a war on the whole concept of social distancing. We like social interaction with physical distancing as our preference, because the concept of social distancing kind of breaks that sociability that we're talking about. The other thing that we're trying to bring to the forefront of retail and food service is we all have to do these protocols and safety, but they're all part of customer service. And safety of your client is part of customer service, and it's always been there. This is just a new way of treating it. So as you put your protocols in and think about all these safety issues, two things. Number one is, how can you do it so the customer doesn't feel safe? It's not an alien environment. How can you do it so that they can walk in and feel comfortable, so they'll stay longer and buy more? That's our goal. It's still with retail and food service. So that's one of the things we like to talk about. We like to, from a Main Street point of view, we'd like to see some alignment of hours for nightlife. So maybe the traditional retail patterns can change on our hours of operation because people are at home instead of in businesses. So where our society is built that everyone getting off at 5 and going somewhere, maybe that's not actually what's happening now because of people working at home. So can the BIAs and the main streets start aligning shoppers, galleries, restaurants, and that type of thing for the to bring more people onto the street at once instead of trying to look at traditional retail hours? You know, that's one thing we're talking about. Parking is another one. What we're seeing is people want quick, inconvenience access to the places they're going. So Main Street has a real advantage there. If you think of a mall and how many doors you may have to open to go to an operation, where if you're on Main Street and I can park and walk directly to your door and come in, there's less touch points. So it's something that you can promote as the reduction of touch points for your place. Now in New Brunswick, we've had very low incurrence of COVID, so we've been lucky, and we're reopened. But one of the, Atlantic Canada's basically reopened. But one of the interesting things in New Brunswick is they didn't go for the 50%. They went for the fact that you can maintain distancing, physical distancing with social interaction. So basically, they use a combination of physical distancing. So I have a client who only went from 80 seats to 60 seats by hanging plexiglass, putting some plexiglass on top of his on the backs of his booths. And but real important is the staggering of the door. Reservations. So when you use your reservation system, instead of every half an hour or 15, it may be every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes, and given clear instructions, because that's one of the major cross points is the door. So that's one of the things that we've looked at. The other is with takeout. Takeout it's very unpredictable for someone who's traditionally a sit-down restaurant. So you're used to kind of a supper hour and a lunch hour, and takeout can happen anytime during the day. And in the middle of a rush hour where you're still taking care of your seats, if takeout happens, it can really throw a wrench in the wheel. So, some help with your restaurateurs on Main Street and in your districts is some of your members is helping them get an order platform that works, a simple app, helping them understand you don't have to serve your whole menu in a takeout environment. Shrink it down to things that can come out quicker and not hold up your line in your cooking line. Menu strategies that if you're going to have takeout, why not build it so for the future? And that's, I guess, where I'll close is all of this, really the BIAs and the Main Streets and the planning, the reason we have flattened the curve is to prepare everybody for the next wave and the next wave and the next wave. And so you can't just be thinking about getting through this. You have to be ready for moving ahead. So can the BIA help everybody take an inventory and stay on board, show their area is meeting these protocols, so when the next wave comes, they can lobby and say, look, we know we're safe. We know we're doing these protocols. We know we're doing all the things we need to do. So the members don't have to do it individually. So there's some ideas that we've been working on across Canada and here in New Brunswick.
If anybody had a doubt that you're from New Brunswick, they just need to listen to your accent for a bit of time there, Patrick, and they'll get the picture.
Very easy now.
I want to talk, Alicia, just bear with us for a second while we talk Canadian stuff for a second, but I don't know if you're familiar with what's been happening here, but I want to hear from the three owners or the three restaurateurs about the impact of income support for workers. We had a national program which is still in place called CERB, and that is paying Canadians whose work evaporated a minimum amount of money every month. And many of them are continuing to collect it. And in fact, some restaurateurs are telling me that the only way because restaurants depend on part-time staff, that the only way that they're probably going to be able to get their staff back is if CERB is extended. And so you continue to get that minimum income from the government, and then you top it up with your restaurant wages. Can I just hear from Matt or Vic or Wendy, how are your staff responding to actually coming back to work, and how do you see the math working, basically?
Let me start by saying.
Okay, Vic, yeah.
Let me start by saying that I think the governments of provincial and federal governments did a fantastic job of coming to the table to support these entry-level jobs, whether they were servers or cooks or busboys or anything else. So to be able to give them $2,000 a month so that they could survive calmed their nerves down quite a bit. And I must say, had it not been that, had it taken a little longer, we would have had more emotional issues than not only financial issues. I think as an immigrant, I can say that you don't come into this country to get arms from your government. You come here to work hard. You come here to give back to the community, give back to the country that has been so supportive of you and allow you to be who you are. So when having to collect either unemployment insurance or CRB from my employees was emotionally like, but this is not what I want. I'm fine. So some of them initially didn't want, because that stigma of saying somebody's going to give you $2,000 a month without having you to work was very tough on some of the staff members of mine. And then they finally got used to it. And I was like, you need income, you do pay your taxes, and eventually this is government helping you perform or giving you something to do. I do think now that CERB has been extended for a little bit, I think it will just kind of blend itself in. As our sales go up, as the summer comes in, as we need more and more staff, I think this intermingling and this will fade away slowly. Is there going to be an abuse? I don't know. I don't want to say it, but I'm sure there are people out there who are, working a lot of hours and still collecting CERB. And I would say politely to them, be careful. You're only hurting your own brothers and sisters, your own fellow people in the industry. So be honest, be trustworthy, talk to the government, talk to somebody that you need. And then just, if you don't need it, if you have enough work and you don't need the help of the government, let that government, because eventually we are going to have to pay back for this. Whether you like it or not, we and our kids are going to have to pay for this, whether it's by property taxes, whether it's by increasing of income tax or anything else. It's going to get paid by somebody. And that somebody is us eventually. So why go in further debt when you can, mitigate that debt now. But I have to say, every circumstance is different. Every restaurant is different. Every industry is different. There is no one way to completely do the rule of like, okay, this is the way it is, because a pub is different than a restaurant is different than a takeout is different than a diner. And so every solution has to be met individually and spoken to by the staff, but the owners should be involved in making sure that the employees are well taken care of, emotionally and financially, and they're part of the solution to them, because it's our job to be the leaders, to showcase to them that this is what, because they want to know from us the way we want to know from our leaders, they want to know from us.
Wendy, how would you augment there what Vic just said?
Well, I agree. I think the CERP program was such a relief. I remember the day I laid off 105 people. I was in tears, sitting at the computer, filling out ROEs all day. So it was great relief knowing that they were getting immediate, like the federal government here, I think did a really great job in putting that program out there, and the money was in their bank accounts really fast. As we got about 2 months in, when I needed to start rehiring people, there was definitely some that were like, this is kind of not bad. They were part-time and kind of getting that money and going, hey, it's summer. So it was actually kind of hard getting some staff back. And then I had staff that were just wanting to work full time. So we brought them back as soon as we could. And it's been great. I think what's been the lifeline for our restaurants has been the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. Without that, it would have been impossible to bring these people back, with our sales being doing takeout 20%, maybe 30%. Now we're maybe at 50% of last year's sales. So the wage subsidy has been a godsend, and it's great having staff back. They've been so supportive. We've been in constant communication, and it's great having them back. Can't see their smiley faces through their masks sometimes, but it's going well, and I'm happy to have them all back.
Just for the benefit of our American viewers, there are two wage supports, two income supports that the Canadian government did. One is the emergency benefit, which is a $2,000 transfer into your bank account. And the other is to the employer to cover a percentage of your wage. So if you stay on their payroll, then the government helps the employer. And that's the transition from going from being the recipient directly of those dollars from the government to then going back to working for your employer. That's the transition. Matt, do you have anything to add on this? And I'm gonna ask you some other stuff in a minute. Go ahead, Matt.
Really briefly, I'm very much in the same page as Wendy. I have a small restaurant, obviously with only 47 seats, so it's a little family of employees of about 25, and I had to let all of them go other than my senior management team, and it was the hardest thing. I called each one individually and spoke to them each about it. And they were all very appreciative of being able to get towards the CRB. And to Wendy's point, the wage subsidy has been everything for my business. Without that, I really don't even know if I would have had the chance to get to where we are today, to be able to start clawing back and fighting back. And it's at the forefront of a lot of my thought when I start forecasting the future. Like I said, I'm very blessed that I have this outdoor space and these patios. But as all the restaurateurs in here know, we operate with the craziest of margins and one of the toughest industries. And when you go back and you think about the fall or the winter where we lose outside and then have to look into a restaurant that is around half capacity, probably if you're lucky, when you're spacing things 2 meters apart, it's probably going to fall a little under that capacity.
So let's talk about that for a sec, because a lot of the people in the chat are commenting on this. What would have happened if the pandemic had happened at a different time of year? It'd be interesting to know how Australia's been dealing with it, because they had it in their winter rather than their summer. But here we are. We can go and eat in patios. Some parts of the country, maybe in Vancouver, you guys are anticipating you'll be eating in patios 12 months of the year. There's lots of parts of Canada that won't be possible. So to the extent to which there are there urban planning and urban design changes that can be made that will allow you to become a four-season restaurant in a pandemic circumstance? Is anybody thinking about that? And Alicia, are you thinking about maybe, I don't know how, your catchment area, is it only California, Alicia, or are you national?
Well, we're based in California, but we do work nationally, and our focus is actually international with
Okay.
recovery and reimagining team based in the U.S. and Canada.
Okay, so then you've heard of Chicago, you've heard of Toronto, you've heard of Winnipeg. We have snow. So what are your thoughts about how this sociable city advancement that you want to promote, how's it going to work when the weather changes? Thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I think that's the $1 million question. I think just really sticking with some of these reduced capacity measures. I think that thankfully, because nightlife, bars, and restaurants are such creative entrepreneurs, we're gonna see some creative ideas coming out. I think some of our other panelists mentioned plexiglass separations, having some of those separate entrances and exits. Winter is definitely the tricky question, though. I'm not sure I have the best answer on that one.
I mean, honestly, Canada should be solving this, for crying out loud. Patrick, you're from New Brunswick. Come on. We should be solving this so that, in Toronto, they've taken portions of the parking lane and they're making these patios. And how difficult would it be actually just put a couple of heaters out there? And so in December.
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, Amsterdam started using little greenhouses
Right, I saw
along
them.
the street, right? And
Yeah.
we even saw those little glass kind of huts that were down in downtown Toronto before COVID. I forget which restaurant was doing them, but they were down in the King Street West area. So, I mean, but that's a very isolated, and that's a big investment too. I mean, throwing up a deck with some wood and a frame underneath it and some lights is one thing. But all of a sudden, if you're buying heaters at, $2,000-$3,000 a crack, you've got to somehow come up with a way to contain that heat in the space. And then the cost of operating the heater, you can start seeing. So realistically, we're lucky it happened now. And if operators aren't looking at their interior to maximize their seating, and if the BIAs aren't lobbying for separation and systems to show that their people are doing it, you're going to have reduced, or unless you want to go to e-commerce and do takeout and then plan for that. But if you want to have it in-house, you've got to start planning now. If you're just trying to get, a chair on the street, that's okay. I'm not criticizing that. But if you come September, October, I mean, here in New Brunswick, mid-August maybe, but it's really this is where Alicia is talking about creativity, and it's got to be inside. And I've got some clients who, I'm not saying I did it, they did it. They just really. I have a client who has 2 operations and they're both back to last year's sales. So they're with reduced capacity, but with a smart strategy and with their staff ready for a shutdown, their staff educating their patrons on how to come in, how to come out, and demonstrating that everyone coming through that door feels safe. And I go back to that if you can't demonstrate that your customers are safe coming in and can't give them that, then you're not doing your job, and it's just like serving food on dirty plates. If you're not doing your job to keep your customers safe, then and incorporating this into customer service, you're not going to get customers back.
But questions just come in from the chat, which is a good one. How do you make these accommodations accessible to people with physical disabilities?
Well, that's a whole other. But if you think about most restaurants, universal design is there already. Or it should be.
Except on but it might not be on their patio, Patrick. Alicia's nodding.
Right.
Alicia, is this something you've thought about already, Alicia?
Definitely. This is something that has been a big concern for us, especially for just making sure that they're in compliance with what we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as people with strollers, with walkers. One person who we recently spoke to with a visual impairment said that that folks tend to memorize where the layout of the streets, and they do that for safety. And so with street closures and extensions of patios, it can be very jarring. So that's one of the things that we're very concerned about, and are trying to work with business improvement districts to create more of that plan. When you take away some of those lanes of traffic and then you're extending out into the street, how are you then coordinating parking? How are you coordinating Uber drop-offs and rideshare pickup hubs and ability to pick up your takeout and that sort of thing, as well as making these areas accessible. And again, it depends too if it's more of an extension into the street for one particular business, as it sounds like from Matt and Wendy, or if you're closing down the street entirely.
Yeah.
So accessibility challenges are going to differ depending on the model that the city is using.
Thursday, we're having a session expressly on this, about the role of design and how can we fix things. I want to go back to money for a second, if I can, gang. I'm interested, not only were there wage implications, but there's also the big old question of rent. Restaurants predominantly are tenants, correct? And I'm curious in terms from all of your perspectives, and I'm ready for just a radical idea. When we look at main streets, for instance, I increasingly wonder if we say that main streets have all these benefits, not just commercial benefits, but social capital benefits and public safety benefits, should we be moving to a place where the property tax on a main street is actually lower? That's one question I have. And or should we be creating programs where where restaurateurs have an incentive to buy their building? Because my gut instinct is that a lot of the restaurants that have survived are because they happen to own their building. Have you guys run the numbers on this? I don't know. Do you own your buildings, Wendy, or are you a tenant?
Rent all of them.
You do. And Vic, are you a tenant or do you own?
No, I own my building on Candy Street. Vij's restaurant owns Candy Street, and the Baishanti restaurant is obviously a lease. But let me get back to this point. You know, we talked about CERB, we talked about wage subsidy, and I was just going to jump in and say also rent relief that was given to us from the landlords of only we having to pay 25%. And I think the solution of that with the landlords is, don't forget the leases that were already put in place, what you were already charging us for it. It should be that the rule of thumb in our industry is 10% of your sales should be your rent. And that is an average rule of thumb. So if you sell $100,000, your rent should be $10,000.
Is it? Is it likely?
Sorry?
Is it like, I mean, in big cities, is that possible that your rent's only 10%?
It is not, and that's why so many restaurants turn so quickly and they go down so quickly, because they just can't pay the rents.
Yeah.
The leases should be focused on 10% of your sales should be what rent should be. So as an owner, if you do $100,000 in sales, the rent of $10,000 should go there. And that's the model we are going to have to work with down the road. It cannot be, because the landlords, what they do is, if one restaurant is paying them $10 a square foot, and then when the next one comes, they say, well, it's $11 now, or it's $12 now. So they negotiate per square foot space rather than what that sale of the restaurants should be.
And
so
I think, and I think this is the point, is that we have to say this is actually about more than just you, the owner. This is actually about the quality of life of that neighborhood. And so is there a public interest in changing that formula? Matt or Wendy, any thought on that? Have you ever given, I don't know what percentage of your gross sales is going to rent. Have you ever thought about, is there another way to work these numbers? Matt, have you ever thought about it?
Well, I'm in a very different situation. Hamilton, like I said,
the rents are cheaper.
Rents are much cheaper. If I went to a 10% rent, I'd be paying next to double what I'm paying right now.
So you're paying 5%.
Yeah,
the moral of the story is go and run a restaurant in a cheaper market.
Yeah, well, it comes with a whole bunch of other issues as well.
Right.
But as someone who not grew up, but spent a lot of time in Toronto, owning my skills and working there, I know that is exactly what Vikram is saying. That is exactly happening in Toronto and all of our major cities. So I probably am the last person that should speak out about this, because I come from a very unique situation where my downtown was in a very, 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 very bad place no more than 10 years ago. So we are just on the upskirt of fixing it and getting better. And I'm sure we will run into this problem in the next 10 years. But currently, right now, I'm in a very good situation. So I don't think I give an accurate opinion on the whole nation in terms of what they're going through. But in my specific scenario, I do pay per square foot, so the problem does exist. we just haven't got to the levels where my price per square foot has got to Vancouver or Toronto prices.
Vic and then Wendy.
Matt, I just need to get into this for a second. I don't mean that every restaurant, every place should have the 10%. I think if you live in a smaller little town, if you live in Nelson, BC, or in Chilliwack, British Columbia, or in Agassiz, that should be an aggregate of where it is. My point is, the landlords have to work with the restaurant owners and small businesses together. And the restaurant owners have to be transparent to the landlords and say, this is what I have made. And the landlords have to come back and say, okay, I'll work with you. My point is, we need to bridge this gap. There's such a huge disparity between these, companies that own land and property, and they are just numbers for us, we are just numbers for them sometimes. And I'm saying is we need to change that focus and become more of a community saying, okay, this is what you have, then I'll take this much from you.
I think the other dilemma that we are aware of because of the role that COI plays, we've been working with Save Hospitality Canada and Save Small Business Canada, and we're aware that that rent program that you're citing, Vic, that's benefited you, many landlords, tens of thousands of landlords did not apply for it. And so other restaurants have not been in the same circumstance. Their landlord has not given them a break. Wendy, has rent been a factor for you in your operations?
Yes. Two of our landlords are small, sort of mom and pop owners of buildings. I know they have mortgages to pay too, so I fully understood the situation they were in, but they stepped up. They contacted me before I had to even ask. I just love them for that. Our base rents are reasonable. I think what really hurts us is we pay the triple net. We pay the property tax on our rent as well. So we pay everything on behalf of the landlord's expense. So that's what really kills us, is the addition of insurance and property tax. Two of our landlords stepped up. One of them was a flat no from the beginning. It's a big landlord, a big developer in the city of Vancouver, where they could easily eat that 25% without fail. And we've been in that particular space for 9 years.
Wow.
Nigel and I, we were unrelenting, sending them letters, like practically begging to help us out. And then I finally wrote one letter just as one of our windows got smashed, and I thought, I've had it. I sent them one more letter, and they finally came around and said they were going to apply. I could see the writing was on the wall. Our neighbors walked out of their lease under the same umbrella with 1 year left on their lease. There's a couple stores that were shuttered. Our street looks like a ghost town. It's on the entrance of Chinatown, and it was becoming dangerous. We had a break-in, and I just told them, like, is this your business plan, to see 6 businesses sit empty? Because you're not going to be getting any restaurants in here anytime soon. So please help. And they did. I've yet to see the help, but they said they would. So fingers crossed they come through. We really, really need it. And the thing that bothered me about that program is that we were at the mercy of our landlords. There was no sort of shove from the province to say, you got to do this. So a lot of them were like, good, I don't have to then. I won't. But
yeah, I mean, again, this is one of these things that and I'm going to ask you each about this now, is, as we come out of this, what do we, or as we continue to live with it, maybe as some of you suggested, maybe we're going to just fall into something else and who knows what's next. But as we move to whatever this new normal is, are there key things that we have to make stick or that we have to develop further? So one that I wonder about is, do we need to find some kind of capital pool that's going to, at a preferred borrowing rate that would allow small businesses to buy their buildings? Or do we want to create land trusts so that some other entity owns those Main Street businesses? And so, because otherwise we'll end up, even before COVID, Main Streets were struggling. Gentrification and chains became the only thing that could be afforded to move in, right? So is this our moment to take that Main Street back and say, well, just a sec, actually, we don't want to have only chains on Main Streets, Alicia, are you thinking about that?
Yes.
I'm going to ask each of you to just give me a couple of things that you think should be the priorities going forward. Go ahead, Alicia, you first.
Oh gosh, I've got a couple.
That's fine. You can
following up on that land trust idea, that's actually something that is being considered by some of the cities that we've been talking to, such as Austin, having the city consider purchasing some of the live music venues to protect them.
Uh-huh.
Other things, something that Toronto did is they put in place a 50% property tax relief for live music venues. So that's been a huge savings. Other things are things like capping third-party delivery fees. I'm not sure if you all are experiencing this,
yeah.
but that has been majorly impacting the ability for restaurants and bars to be able to maintain a profit. So New York City actually was able to pass a 10% cap instead of the rates that some of these cities are passing of 15%, 30% that's being charged by Grubhub and Uber Eats. And finally, one of the big things is that here, I'd love to know too if you all pay into this too, but we have something called business interruption insurance. And this is something that businesses have been paying for years, if not decades. And it has been unconscionable that when businesses finally need it and they call their insurance companies and say, we're experiencing this pandemic, they're using this obscure language in their insurance policies to deny them that coverage. So making sure moving forward that we have some really clear language to protect businesses in the event of another pandemic, or having some sort of subsidy, as you mentioned, Mary, to be able to help businesses through this difficult time.
Yeah, you just mentioned a pet peeve of mine, which is delivery. Are you aware of any local delivery initiatives so that instead of those big conglomerates that have tried to come in, and some of them have left Canada, are you aware of local communities that have actually created their own delivery capacity where 10 restaurants join together or whatever?
I did hear about something like that. There was a partnership in Orlando, but actually it was actually through Uber Eats, so that is a larger company, but I believe that they did partner on a local level to try and provide more affordable rates. I'm not sure about some of the other kind of local apps though.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, Vic, what do you think in terms of a couple of things that we need to be really, really focused on now going forward?
Well, I think awareness of the fact that what is coming down the pipeline. So what is the model going to look like? So as leaders, you need to take the initiative and say, oh, I want to put a patio right here, or I want to do a delivery service from here, or I just want to do dine-in only. It's okay for me to do less dine-in or takeout, whatever your model is. The second most important part is, I think, communication at the level of what is happening. So rather than just keep saying this government hasn't done this or that organization hasn't done this, let's work together, let's sit on the table and have proper ways of figuring things out. And conversations are very, very important. And listening to the other people. So if there is a mom pop shop that is having a hard time, listen to them and listen to what they are coming from and where they're coming from. Or if it's a big organization that has 50 restaurants in that sense, their challenges are slightly different than everybody else. So you can't blanket it. And I've always said this, it's like you cannot say the restaurant industry. You have to say a small business industry, which is an individual restaurant at a different level. And what is going to happen down the road, even I don't know. Nobody knows.
What about, Vic, how price sensitive can we be here? Some people in the chat are commenting that some restaurants are, when you get your bill, they're putting a premium sort of to cover costs for PPE and stuff. And if you can only seat half the number of patrons, then maybe your costs should go up, and then local patrons have to be prepared to pay a premium if they want to eat in a restaurant. Does that concern you that might be part of the solution, if you're just going to raise your prices?
Good food is not cheap, and it should never be cheap. But I don't think we need to start. This is my personal opinion. We've discussed it with our own management team as well. Mike and Miru and Oz, we discussed this with them and said, should we put price on this? No. I mean, I don't think you need to say, then you're going to have to start saying electricity so much and insurance so much and this so much. You need to stop that. I think the price should reflect on the menu, inclusive of all that. That's cost of doing business and cost of doing whatever happens. Having said that, nobody's saying that your food should be cheap. Why should your food be cheap? Good food, good quality. There are farmers who have brought it in. There are people who have delivered this food to you fresh. There are people who made it and they want good wages and they want to survive in this world. Why should that be cheap? So nobody's saying that food should be cheap. No. It should be the value should be.
Right. Patrick, from you, a couple of thoughts on what you
I'm
think.
going to just follow up on food cheap. What we're seeing on delivery is there's a propensity to go to a lower price point for delivery in general. That's one of the statistics we're seeing. But the other thing we're seeing in retail in general, and I think it applies to food service, is less frequency, higher purchase per visit. So this goes back to making sure your client wants to stay, because they're willing to spend more when they're there because they're going out less as much. So that's your strategy. And I'm not saying increasing your pricing, but is it somehow that you can package so you can increase your average check when the customer is in your restaurant? So that's
and Patrick, isn't that in essence what happened? Some of the higher end restaurants that I've seen, they now have all these groceries. They have prepared foods. So I am dropping more money there.
Right, take them with you, right? Add on incremental sales, that type of thing. That's where that is going. So back to getting the people in, making them comfortable, and selling them more is your strategy, because they're going out less as much, but they still may have the same disposable income. So it's just instead of getting it as frequency, you get more in one stop. Back to the Main Street strategies. We have been looking at some of the larger real estate operators, and they are willing to negotiate with the tenants that have shown success. But a lot of them are kind of saying, you know what, I had people on the bubble, and the bubble was supposed to break for business success anyway, or we've been carrying them for 3 or 4 years, so I'm not engaging. And that's so that's it. So when you go back to Main Street and planning the neighborhood, it's important that the BIA or the Main Street or whoever it is the vendor, the tenants themselves, start talking to the landlords about curation of the whole neighborhood. What's the mix that's going to work? And this is where you can talk to your city. We did a study for the city of Toronto and recommended capping the square footage size of food service operations in certain types of neighborhoods. So you got more of a turnover. In a neighborhood that's gentrified and single family homes have become multi-unit homes, people don't have the social space in their house, so the restaurants become the social space. So what we were, this is the nightlife thing. So what we were saying is, but if you just have one big 6,000 square foot chain come in, where do they get their variety? So they're going to start going to other neighborhoods. So the newly gentrified neighborhood becomes the one that's most popular, because the chains come in after, buy up 3 storefronts and do a 6,000. So try to keep it around, 1,500 to 3,000 is kind of the sweet spot of square footage. So there are a couple of ideas that, from the larger numbers we're seeing, that we can try to hit the street with.
Okay, I've only got a few more minutes, and then I'm going to plug Thursday, which is going to deal with the physical pieces. Matt, and then Wendy, last 2 words for you guys in terms of what you think we should be focusing on going forward. Matt.
Yeah, really quickly, I love the idea that was brought up about assistance with the delivery fees. That's something that really hit us hard when we had to switch to delivery. We didn't know about the game, and I stayed away from these delivery apps because of these charges, and then I was forced into it. So some sort of regulation that makes apps doable would be lovely. And then I really saw my city come out in full force through this and really push a lot of red tape and bureaucracy to help us get some licensing on the street, let us the liquor license on our street, and stuff that normally would take a lot longer came a lot quicker. So I think
you want that to stick?
Yeah, I would love to be able to work with my city and get things done in days to weeks as opposed to months. That would be huge on our
COVID time. Everything has to go to COVID time. Last word to you, Wendy. What do you think we should be focusing on going forward?
The real estate talk is interesting. It's something I've never even dreamed of, because real estate is so expensive in Vancouver, but that's, down the road. One thing that's recently happened in the province of BC has been the wholesale liquor pricing, that we've finally been allowed to purchase our liquor supply for wholesale costs. So that's huge. It's temporary, they keep reminding us, but that's going to be a huge savings. And because everyone right now is also looking for a deal. So I feel like we're all, pricing ourselves to the bottom, like so-and-so selling a pint for $6. We better do it for $5. Yeah. It's really challenging. People want happy hours. So we need assistance there, and the wholesale pricing will give us a boost. And it's something we've been fighting for years here. And they finally just gave it to us now. So that will help. Hopefully that sticks.
Yeah. You're one of the most nimble industries. And boy, if there was a time when you needed to be nimble, it was during COVID. And I think that we're going to go look back on this and recognize that there were all sorts of smart things that, as you just suggested, the last two, you were pushing to get regulations changed. And then finally, they get changed under these circumstances. So I hope all our city talkers will come back and join us on Thursday when we are going to have, as part of the Bring Back Main Street Week, we're going to talk about the role of design and engagement. And that will include people in the chat like Chris Fraser and Susan Chin, who are some super city talkers, if I may say. Always nice to see you guys online. About Scandinavia and streets, and are there different ways to use streets, and what about heaters, and oh my gosh, all these things. So that's Thursday, and then on Friday we're with the Mayor of Windsor, and Windsor is going through an extraordinarily challenging time. If you read the newspapers in Canada, you will know that it is the hot spot for incidents because of all the agricultural workers in the Southwest. Plus, it's a border city, so we'll be with the Mayor of Windsor on Friday. I hope you'll join us. Listen, gang, I really could talk with you all day. In fact, I need to hang up and go get something to eat. And I'm going to make sure tonight, Alicia, that I go out onto the street just to celebrate the potential of sociable cities in the evenings, in the dark. And what an important part of the fabric of urban life you all are. And we appreciate you coming on City Talk and sharing with us your experience. And we wish you well as you continue to adapt and change and build your term, Alicia, the sociable city. So thanks very much for joining us on City Talk. Real pleasure to hear from you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.